I didn't recognize the industry or the cannabis industry as it is in Australia. I didn't realize that it was as burgeoning as most other places in North America. And so, can you give me a little bit of your background and of the industry as it stands right now in Australia?
Certainly. So it's quite an interesting story. I started off 3 years ago as a total cannabis skeptic. I didn't see this as medicine, and I saw cannabis as a dangerous, highly addictive drug. However, I stumbled across some statistics showing the massive toll of overdoses from pharmaceutical opioids, which were prescription drugs. As a health professional, I felt partly responsible. So I started researching it, and one thing led to another. My wife jumped on board as well. She's a medical scientist, and we did as much research as we could. We ended up going to the Cannabis Science Conference in Portland, Oregon, and a week later we went to the International Cannabis Business Conference in Vancouver, BC, and we started researching. We realised, hey, there's not only does cannabis help a few select medical conditions, it's got all these other uses, particularly in the areas of chronic pain as an alternative to pharmaceutical opioids. So following on from there, I thought that this would really suit a pharmacy model, and Australia, not long after that, legalised it federally. They did so pretty much in record time, overnight, and they legalised medical cannabis, the cultivation, production, research, after 80 years of prohibition. Pretty much all sides of politics came on board, and it was rushed through Parliament. And I set up a company dedicated to wholesaling, distributing medical cannabis to pharmacies, and we obtained the first import license ever, and we imported Canadian medical cannabis, and it was one of the first international shipments of its kind in the new era of medical cannabis. And probably for the first couple of years, we're reliant on Canadian imports. There's only Canadian medical cannabis in Australia, and now they're just starting to grow cannabis in Australia. So it may swing around, but I think we'll be reliant on imported product for the time being for a while. And we've got a pharmacy system whereby doctors write prescriptions, and it's provided to patients in a pharmacy setting. So there's probably about 20 people looking at cultivating cannabis in Australia. So far, there's only one person that's got a product one company that's got a product to market. But there's hope, just because of our co-location to Asia, that we're gearing up to be an agricultural producer based on our history. We actually produce about 70% of the opium poppies for worldwide pharmaceutical opioids in one state or province of Australia called Tasmania, where it's actually processed with American money to make those nasty pharmaceutical opioids I was talking about earlier on. But there is potential for the Australian agricultural industry, but we've got a long way to go based on the scale you guys are already doing it in Canada and the patient numbers in North America.
And what are the current patient numbers in Australia?
So we started off quite low. In the first year, we only had 300 patients, and I thought that was really low, but I was speaking to someone from Health Canada at one of the conferences I attended in Canada in the year 2001. You guys only had 150, so we were double you in the first year. In the second year, we had 1,400, and we've just passed that about 3 months ago, and we're well over 2,000 now. And I think we're on track to get 5,000 to 10,000 in year 3. And one of the differences is the system has gone from being a really convoluted process of paperwork. They've already streamlined it to a one-page online form, and it's gone from some applications taking 2 months to be processed to we've seen applications come back in as little as 3 minutes. And we're already starting seeing cannabis-specific clinics. And I know the Canadian market really took off around about 2014, 2015, once you guys started having cannabis-specific clinics over there. and patient numbers started really increasing. So I'd say we're on track in 5 to 10 years to have somewhere in the order of 200,000 medical cannabis patients.
Oh, wow, that is a significant number for the short space of time to grow to that number. But that's exciting.
Following on from that, what I alluded to earlier on, that we're on the doorstep of Asia. Australia provides a lot of pharmaceutical products and raw agricultural products to Asia, and at the moment they're going nuts over our Australian baby formula and vitamins because we've got a clean food chain. So we're hoping that the same will be the case with cannabis. And if you look at China and India, both countries with over 1 billion people, they've got a long history of using cannabis as a medicine. It's currently illegal. However, there's a trend through Southeast Asian countries such as Thailand and South Korea already looking at legalizing. I think Philippines is also looking at doing things. I know China and India are very interested in hemp, and there's been interest out of Japan as well. So I predict in the future there'll be a bit of a wave happening throughout Asia with cannabis as a medicine.
Great. And you mentioned that you were able to secure the first license to import into Australia. Since then, have there been other import licenses granted for?
Yeah, there's been a number. We were the first. The very close second was another Canadian company called Tilray. We imported Canamed from Saskatoon. And there's been a number of Canadian LPs put products into the Australian market. You guys have been doing it a long time. We've got a lot of expertise in that area, so we're learning from the best. There's a lot of interest in Canadian companies in Australian cultivators as well.
Right. And right now, you said there's only one licensed producer in Australia?
No, there's one with product to market, but it's probably one of, I expect about 20 that would have product over the next 5 years. It is a bit of a process. It's very easy to grow cannabis small scale, a lot harder to grow it on a bigger scale. Then you've got different methods of extraction, formulation. It takes a while to get product to market. We're currently only allowing GMP cannabis. Most of the doctors are favouring concentrates, i.e. non-smoked cannabis, so things like oils, capsules, tinctures are really, really popular. And we're looking at a pharmaceutical elegant product. The Australian government is making sure that the standards are kept up as far as having a GMP product.
And what do you see as the future for the industry in Australia outside of the growth to Asia and maybe even South Asia? What about within Australia and I guess New Zealand being your close neighbor? What do you see as the growth in the industry there in terms of the producers and the dispensaries and the whole abstract of the industry, not so much on the patient side?
Yeah, so I think our industry has got some really positive things ahead of it as patient numbers grow, as Asia comes online. We've adopted a very medical system. The dispensary model is only really North America, particularly America. I believe pharmacies are a really good distribution model for cannabis. Most of the patients we've seen use medical cannabis are on a range of other medications, so pharmacists are really well placed to counsel patients not only on the cannabis but their other medications. They're also it's good having it available through pharmacies because health funds are more likely to subsidise it if it's seen as a medicine. What is happening, you mentioned New Zealand, they're having a referendum on adult use cannabis in a couple of years. And I believe if they pass cannabis for adult use in New Zealand, the conversation is going to be brought forward in Australia. So I know Canada's recently gone from having medical cannabis available on doctor's recommendation to adult use. and the market's expected to grow tenfold. I see the same unfolding here.
Okay, that's interesting because it seems to be almost a global trend in that area of the recreational legalization, and taking the stigma out of, you know, people being stopped and having cannabis on them and ending up with some form of a criminal record. So that was, I think, one of the driving forces behind it. And it seems to be catching on in many places globally. So that's a very interesting uh, perspective as well, to see that Australia maybe and New Zealand may be going in that direction as well.
Oh, definitely. No, I think it's a foregone conclusion that once the authorities realise the sky doesn't fall in with cannabis use, and we've seen it in a number of US states. They've adopted a very successful medical program, and there's been some public health benefits for a well-managed system, i.e., lower opioid use, lower harm from alcohol abuse, and from there they've gone on to have a very successful adult use system or regulations, and it cuts down on crime. There's a lot to be said, as I mentioned previously, for harm minimisation. That the harm from alcohol is far greater, and that's perfectly legal in a lot of cases. But in the case of cannabis as a medicine, it's got some really exciting things, and where not only legal medically, but research is very easy to do over here. It's actually encouraged by some of the highest levels of government because they've seen some promising signs of cannabis as a useful tool, not only for chronic pain and particularly with the harms from pharmaceutical opioids, that cannabis is a very real alternative. There's some really interesting work being done in palliative care patients,
Mhm.
and there was a scientist in my hometown had some groundbreaking research in pancreatic cancer where he found rat models that were given cannabis and chemotherapy lived 4 times longer than the control. And in the case of pancreatic, that they've been using the same chemotherapy drugs for the last 50 years without any progress in survival rates, and it's got a very low survival rate. It's basically a death sentence once you get it, and this shows promise for human trials and treatment.
That's awesome. And yeah, that's something that I know a lot of the researchers here in Canada have been looking at. There have been a few studies as well out of Toronto that has been pretty positive as well for different forms of cancer and the treatment using different extracts from the organic plants of cannabis. So it's really moving in a really good direction on the medicinal side and showing the benefits of the plant as opposed to the continuation use of drugs and manufactured chemicals in the human body. So that's a great thing. What are some of the challenges that Australia is facing today as it relates to the industry?
Two main challenges I can think of. Well, probably let's talk about three. So one, we've got very low patient numbers,
Hmm.
and you've got people setting up businesses, and they need to do that at scale. So we need the patient numbers to grow so they can manufacture at scale. To make the medicine at a reasonable price at the moment is quite expensive. We're relying on imports. There's quite a few restrictions. So that will certainly get there as patient numbers grow. And we've recently seen a big upsurge in numbers. When they first introduced the system, they legalised it federally, but they handed a lot of the power to the various states. And I think Canada's got a very similar problem with its provinces,
Hmm.
whereby each province in Canada's got a different law. So we had the very same thing in Australia, where every state introduced this extra layer of bureaucracy, making it difficult for prescribers to prescribe a medical product to their patients. So they've streamlined that recently. As I said, it's gone from a 2-month process to a 3-minute sort of record service level as far as prescribing medical cannabis. I think that will improve over time. You need to have that conversation whereby patients that are vulnerable, that need medical treatment, are being denied medical cannabis because there's too much paperwork for the doctors to prescribe. So we've had that problem early. I think there's still problems there, that there are a few differences from state to state. I know you've got similar problems there. And there's also a lot of pushback from some of the prescribers who are used to prescribing pharmaceutical opioids, saying there's no evidence, and there's a number speaking out against cannabis simply they've had no experience in that area, simply because they haven't educated themselves that it is a viable alternative. So there's a number of challenges, but I think the industry is moving in the right direction, with more doctors starting to prescribe, more patient numbers, and less bureaucracy. So whilst progress isn't fast enough for some, I think if you look at other pharmaceutical drugs which sometimes take years and years to come to the forefront, cannabis is moving at quite a decent pace.
That's very true. And then if you could blink your eye and wish for something that would be significant for the industry, what would that be? And positive.
So there's a number of private health funds, private health insurers over here at the moment who are thinking about covering medical cannabis. At the moment, it's a private prescription. It's not subsidised by the federal government. We're starting to see a couple of areas of subsidy, like motor vehicle patients get their cannabis subsidised under that legislation, and workers' compensation. However, some of the private insurers are just thinking about it, and there's one that I know of that has subsidised their patients. So that would be nice for them to see it as a medicine that's an alternative to others and offers a treatment for some of their members. So yeah, I think that would really help the industry and help some of the patients. And there's also an economic argument that if they can pay for a patient's medical cannabis and it keeps them out of the hospital, then they're saving. And the cost for a patient entering the hospital system over here is costed at about 2,000 Australian dollars per day. The Australian dollar and the Canadian dollar is 1 for 1, so that makes it easier for you guys to work out. So it's roughly 2,000 Canadian dollars per day per patient. And if they can subsidise medical cannabis for in the order of $100 to $200 to $300 per patient per month, there's certainly a cash flow saving for some of the private health insurers. So we're just starting to have that conversation now.
And do you think that that would be something that you could see happening within a few years or 5 years out?
Next couple of years, you're already starting to see some of the state governments realise the benefits where cannabis is working and keeping patients out of hospital, and in some cases of epileptic children where they've tried 10 other medications without success, having hundreds of seizures, and they're becoming seizure-free or greatly reduced seizures using a medical cannabis product. It's certainly proof, and a couple of them are starting to pay for their patients' medical cannabis simply because it's saving lives and cost-effective.
Absolutely. And that's, again, another aspect of this that is a global trend. So it's nice to see that it is happening, the different people that I'm speaking with from different parts of the world, and that is the common thread of what everyone is saying. So it's nice to know that that on a global scale it's being looked at. Thank you again for your time. This has been interesting,